Welcome to our latest edition of Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute. I'm Jonathan Hudson, and in today's edition, we'll focus on a whole variety of issues, but of course, with chief focus on Israel, the Lebanese front, the Gaza Strip, as well as the Islamic Republic of Iran. And before all of that, today, October 7th, it's important to highlight since last year, on the same date, the Islamist Hamas and the terror affiliates of this terror group in the Gaza Strip launched a surprise onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping approximately 250 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 101 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. The subsequent day, Iran essentially joined this war by greenlighting its proxy Hezbollah to launch cross-border attacks against Israel. Since then, Hezbollah has launched thousands upon thousands of rockets, and not Hezbollah alone. Additional Iranian proxies from Yemen, from Iraq, from Syria have also targeted the state of Israel, and Iran, of course, also directly, twice in less than 6 months. Let's now turn to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Dr. Michael Duran, Senior Fellow and Director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at Hudson Institute, formerly the Senior Director at the National Security Council in Washington for the MENA region. It's good to see you, Mike. A dramatic day. Everybody remembers where we were, of course, last year. But what can you start us off with today?
Well, great to be here, Jonathan. Thank you. Yeah, it is a dramatic day. And of course, the Israelis are taking the day to commemorate the horrible events of 1 year ago. And that is all fitting and proper. But the thing that most strikes me personally today is how much the war has changed and how much the world has changed in the last year. The big question that is in front of us right now with respect to the war is what Israel is going to do in response to the ballistic missile attack that Iran launched last week. The Americans are putting pressure on the Israeli government not to hit oil infrastructure sites, not to hit nuclear sites, to be proportional in their response. A word that in this context, I don't know exactly what that means, but it clearly means they want the Israelis to be restrained. The Israelis have a strong interest in stepping over the lines that are set by the United States, in my view, because those lines have the effect of enhancing the advantages that the ballistic missiles, drones, and cruise missiles that Iran and its proxies have been shooting at Israel have. Those weapons are hard to defend against, and they're hard to defend against. They're hard to suppress. Very hard to suppress. In order to suppress them, you really have to take from the adversary something that he holds very dear. The main adversary is Iran. The Biden administration has, from the beginning, defined this war as a Palestinian-Israeli war, and it keeps talking about not wanting it to turn this into a regional war. It has always been a regional war. It has always been an Iran-led regional war against Israel, and the answer is going to come from deterring Iran. So the Israelis have an interest in stepping over that line, but they're very dependent on the Americans and they have to maintain good relations with them. So we're all waiting to see how the Netanyahu government is going to maneuver between those competing imperatives.
Indeed. Let's now turn elsewhere in Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Dr. Eyal Hulata, formerly an Israeli National Security Advisor, a Mossad Division Chief, and currently a Senior Fellow at the FDD in Washington, D.C. It's good to see you, Eyal.
Thank you, Jonathan.
It's a pleasure to have you. I'd like to start by asking you, just a couple of months ago, we had a cup of coffee together during the course of which you quoted a TV series called West Wing. You, of course, highlighted what is the merit of proportionality, if I'm not mistaken.
What is the virtue of a proportionate response?
There we go. That was the one. And even though the sequence on that TV show ended up to be somewhat unfortunate, I'd like to ask you that very question.
Yeah, Jonathan, I think it's a good question from the beginning of this war because Israel is clearly after being surprised on October 7 in catastrophic way. I mean, this has been an Israeli failure way more than it has been a Hamas success. But since that failure to defend our own civilian, Israel has responded in Gaza. And then engaged in 6 more fronts, 7 front in total. And Israel has been always questioning what is the proper manner to respond and the issue of proportionality. And in Gaza specifically, Israel has unleashed almost all of our ground capabilities and aerial capabilities. And there isn't a single location in Gaza that our troops haven't been in above ground, and a lot of activity in the subterranean tunnels that were created by Hamas over many years, with a lot of damage, right? With a lot of Hamas terrorists killed, and also civilians. I've just seen a reporting by an Israeli journalist quoting a Hamas official saying that about 80% of those who've been killed in Gaza were either Hamas operatives or their immediate families that they were hiding in their presence. Is that proportional? What is proportionate? How could you decide what is proportionate after slaughtering and raping and mutilating so many of our civilians on the day of October 7? And this will stay there. We're getting a lot of criticism about whether or not we responded proportionately, and are we abiding the international law? Of course we are, but the world doesn't like it when we fight back in the way that we did. And then we have Lebanon. And in Lebanon, Israel has shown a lot of restraint for months. Hezbollah started firing at us on October 8th with thousands of rockets over the last year. And Israel has responded very surgically, mostly because we wanted to focus our efforts in Gaza. And then in a set of 2-3 weeks, we have been able to massively target and pinpoint surgically attack only those who really deserve it all over Lebanon with pagers and walkie-talkies and surgical aerial strikes and so forth. With far less collateral damage of civilians. Is that proportionate? Is that not proportionate? How do you weigh those? And that's a crucial question as we look at how Israel should respond to the attack by Iran. Back in April, when Iran fired the first barrage of about 300 projectiles at Israel, Israel decided to respond very symbolically, I will say, to prove a point that we can penetrate their air defense while they cannot penetrate our air defense, and attacked one of their air defense capabilities. But that was a very symbolic move and nothing more than that. Israel cannot respond again symbolically after what happened about 2 weeks ago, or on that Friday, 10 days ago, on that Friday by Iran. Israel will need to respond in a way that will make Iran understand that they cannot just decide out of the blue to fire 200 ballistic missiles on Israel and get away with it. Will the world view this as proportionate? Well, we'll see.
We will see indeed. Let's now turn elsewhere here in Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Mossad's Intelligence Directorate-Chief, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. It's good to see you, Amnon. I'd like to immediately dive into the same line of questioning and ask, since on the one hand, we hear Dr. Duran highlighting that Israel is under significant pressure by the Biden administration about the need to diminish, at least in Washington's perspective, the significance of an attack against Iran. But on the other hand, as we hear Dr. Khulata mention, Israel cannot do so without being potentially on a once again receiving end, unless it really goes after the Iranian infrastructure.
I believe that first of all, we have to look at what does Israel really want to achieve. And on second grade, to speak about the US position in the other parts of the world. Now, let me say as follows. Israel cannot go through this event of 200 projectiles launched to Israel and kept people in shelters for more than an hour without a response. That's definite. Now, regarding the kind of response that we can launch back into Iran, I think that we have some possibilities and some options. Now, the question that we have to ask ourselves, what do we want to achieve? Do we want to give some heat back, and by that put an end to that kind of for attrition right now until the next time it comes, and nobody knows when it comes? Or do we want to get into a larger war with Iran, including all its proxies? That will dictate what kind of response will Israel choose to implement on the Iranian side. That means that you can go and hit energy, which is not recommended in my point of view, because it will raise the high price of oil in the world, and everybody will condemn and of course blame Israel for that. It can drag Iran to hit back into their what we call allies in the Persian Gulf, meaning the UAE and Saudi Arabia and others as well. And by that, Israel will be blamed one more time. Or we can go and hit some infrastructures that, to give some sign, like, let's say, for example, air defense systems, to demolish them and to give Iran a great sign that we can penetrate each one of the nuclear facilities on the next phase if needed. I think that this is the balance that we have to debate between ourselves. And of course, in consultant with the Americans, with the US, and the Defense Minister Gallant is going now into that area only, not in order to consult with the Secretary of Defense of the US, and let's see what comes next. But certainly we know that for the time being, nothing will happen until he comes back. And then the consideration will go on, and Israel has to choose. Does it want to go into a large war with Iran and full confrontation and direct confrontation with Iran that will drag all the proxies that are remaining still in Syria, in Iraq, and in Yemen to participate in this war, or to give something that is proportionate, just like Iran, just like Dr. Hulata mentioned before. And proportionate, of course, is in our point of view, and to see what comes next.
Thank you, Dr. Sofrin. Dr. Duran, I had a conversation with a friend who is a director of one of the largest Ivy League institutions in the United States, specifically focused on the Middle East. And he asked me whether or not I believe that the United States would join alongside Israel in a strike against Iran. I told him personally that I think that I would be pleasantly surprised if it does. What is your take on that, and to what degree do you think that American direct involvement in such an operation would de-escalate rather than allow Iran for room to maneuver?
Well, I think that the chance of the Biden administration getting directly involved with Israel in an attack on Iran at this stage is about nil. Their entire worldview sees the role of the United States as a kind of mediator between America's allies and Iran and its resistance axis. It's really a deep part of their worldview. They think that the Middle East is better served and the American interest is better served if the United States puts distance between itself and Israel, especially with respect to the Israeli-Iranian conflict. So I just don't see that happening. But there is an interesting development that's going on right now. My read on Defense Minister Gallant's trip to Washington is that this is part of an American effort to delay the Israeli attack, to string the Israelis along as far as possible without acting quickly, and to put other alternatives before the Israelis. And in that context, it's interesting to look at the recent American-British attack on the Houthis in Yemen. This was of a higher level of attack, a more robust attack that the Americans have carried out since the beginning of the Houthi involvement in the conflict. And remember, the Houthis have been directly attacking Americans. So they've been directly attacking American ships, not just international shipping, but the United States has been very, very restrained in its response. It has not held Iran directly responsible for what the Houthis do. It hasn't touched an Iranian head in Yemen, let alone Iran itself. But it's also been very reactive and defensive with respect to the Houthis. I think that this is part of a negotiation with the Israelis, so that when Defense Minister Gallant comes on Wednesday or Tuesday night, whenever he comes, the Americans are going to put before him a menu of options. They're going to say, look, if you go for a tough Israeli, a hard-hitting Israeli reaction to the Iranians, there will be all these negative possibilities, including attacks by Iran on Saudi Arabia and the UAE, including raising of oil prices, all the things that Dr. Sofrain mentioned. But the alternative is we can do X, Y, and Z with you. Now, the things the Americans will do with Israel will not be direct attacks on Iran, but they will be items designed to diminish the regional power of Iran. So it's gonna complicate. It's going to complicate the Israeli decision making. They don't want to stick their thumb right in the eye of the Americans and say, no, we're going to go it alone. So we can't really say exactly where this debate is, because we don't know what the Americans are offering, but they're offering something, believe me.
Indeed. Well, Dr. Khulata, there are reports circulating here in Israel about specific American offers of some sort of a diplomatic package and a military package in order to incentivize Israel to avoid strategic or critical infrastructure, as Dr. Duran mentioned. Is that something Israel needs to take into its calculus?
So clearly, Mike is a very experienced Washington official, and I think this is exactly what's happening at the moment, and that was to be expected. I'm in no position to suggest American policy or to give grades to an American administration, but there is a pattern here with the way that the administration has been conducting their business. Even when I was National Security Advisor, working with them and meeting them in the White House and elsewhere. If the focus is de-escalation and that is the goal, then there is a menu of things that the Americans can offer for that. As for Israel, look, this indeed will put Israel in a very difficult position. And I must say, I've said this from the beginning of the war, President Biden's commitment to Israel's security from the very beginning was extremely high, unprecedented, and should be not taken for granted by any Israeli and praised at every stage. It's the commitment, the direct commitment, and the amount of ammunition and the supplement and the political support all around it. In parallel to that, the full energy was put to de-escalate the region, so this does not come out, even when American interests were directly threatened. As Mike said before, the Houthis are influencing global trade and American interests, and the fact that the U.S. Navy is not able to secure global maritime trade routes is something that the U.S. should ask themselves if this is reasonable or not for their perspective. I don't think so. I don't think this is part of how the Americans would have wanted to deploy their posture all over the globe. But that's for the Americans to decide. As for Israel, definitely Prime Minister Netanyahu will be confined in this. We need all to remember that after the April attack, President Biden told Prime Minister Netanyahu over the phone, take the win. I'm not sure I understood what the win was. The fact that Israel has good air defenses and we're able to defend our civilians because we prepared in advance on the defense, that's not a win. You do not deter by denial, and you do not deter by defense. You deter by attack and proving to the other side that they cannot damage you the way that you can damage them. But that was the policy that President Biden has put in front of Netanyahu, and we should expect that to happen again. I think that there must be a silver line that Israel can follow that will inflict enough damage on Iran on the one side and not jeopardize the interests of the other side. I think, as Mike said, Israel should not believe or hope the American administration will join this attack, which complicates things, especially if we want to go after the nuclear facilities, which I think we should. That should be the top priority. But this is something that we have to make sure that at the end of it, the job was done properly. And I'm not sure that we're in this circumstance at the moment. And the economic infrastructure, President Biden has already said what he thinks about that as well. There does leave room for things that we can do. I don't want to get into all of those details here, but I truly hope that this will be the decision made by the government. I know that this is the propositions that are brought by the defense establishment, the IDF, the Air Force, Mossad, and others. And there must be a way to respond properly without breaking all of the rules so close to an American elections, with Biden's position made so clearly.
Indeed. Well, General Sofrin, there are a couple of at least public complications, one of which is, of course, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan has come out, its foreign minister, of course, came out with a statement in which he noted that it's not only that it will prevent Iranian missiles from crossing its territorial airspace, but it will not allow also Israel to cynically use its territory for attacking Iran or anyone else for that matter. Is that something that has been said for the purpose of trying to alleviate some tensions between them and the Iranians, or is this something that the Jordanians are genuinely trying to enforce?
The Jordanians have their own interest, and their interest is to preserve the territory and their independence, and not to be dragged into this war by each side. Let's us remember that on 1991, on the first Gulf War, Prime Minister Shamir met King Hussein in London, and they discussed the coming war with Iraq. And Prime Minister Shamir asked King Hussein if we'll have to go and attack Iraq, or the western side of Iraq, where the rocket launchers or the missile launchers were deployed, would you ignore us flying over Jordan into Iraq to attack there? And King Hussein said, I can't afford it. Since I'm a Muslim, I live in the Muslim world, and they will think I'm a traitor and I cooperate with Israel. And if you will try to fly over the Jordanian territory into Iraq, we will try to take you down by our air defense systems. I think that ratio goes the same with his son, King Abdullah, that claims that he is not part of this game. He doesn't want the Iranians to use his territory to attack Israel and vice versa. And I think this is a declaration that intends to say that I'm neutral, I'm not part of that game. I don't want to be hit by the Iranians, and therefore please do not use our territory in order to attack Iran.
Indeed. Of course, Jordan is a vital partner of the State of Israel, considering the strategic depth of field that it signifies. But we're drawing near to the end of the program. 2 sentences from each of you on the whole variety of issues that still stand before us. Dr. Duran, we'll start with you.
I just want to respond to or expand a little bit on what Dr. Hulata said about the take the win. I think it's very important that Americans recognize that there was a cost to the American policy of urging restraint on Israel the last time around in April when Iran shot the missiles then. Iran got information about the Israeli systems, defense systems. It changed its tactics. It shot this last time around last week only ballistic missiles because Israel has a multi-tiered defensive system, and what they did is they used missiles that engaged with only one tier. So they saturated a tier. They understand how to do this because of the information they got last time. Not responding to your enemy when he attacks you like this is costly because he gains something by the exercise. I think we need to understand that.
Dr. Hulata?
Yeah, I want to add something on a different front we didn't have a chance to cover, and that is the implications of what's happened over the last year on the Arab world. And I just want to offer an observation. Maybe we can elaborate this on another side. Lebanon now is in the best situation they could for the Lebanese to take back their country from the Iranian grip and fingernails holding them by the throat. And I hope they can take this opportunity to do that. This war was imposed in Israel. We didn't look for it. We didn't plan for it. But once it has started, and once Israel is successful in achieving operational gains on all over the fronts, it is up to the region, and I think it's also up to the international community. And I wish the American administration would use that to shape and reshape the way it is the Middle East is operating, specifically as it comes to the Iranian grip, to the Iranian regime itself, and it's to its strategy to topple countries one by one.
General Sofri?
I think that if you look at what happens on the last 2 weeks in the Middle East, Israel is beginning to change the equation, meaning Hamas military force is demolished. It still controls Gaza Strip on the what we call on the civilian side, but on the military side, and we are demolishing each organization we see or new organization coming in. Hezbollah is in its lowest strategic position ever, I think, since 2006. And we have to take leverage on that and to get to some agreement that will push back Hezbollah north to the Litani River and try to put constraints on it by using the power of what we call the Western world. And if you look at the Middle East, I think that in the end, we should engage Iran in some way. I don't know still how to define it, but we'll have to get there because Iran is the origins of whatever happens in the Middle East.
Absolutely. Well, with that, General Sofri, Dr. Khulata, and Dr. Duran, I'd like to thank you for your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition of Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a good day. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.